So, you know, have you ever been in a gallery, maybe standing in front of some modern art? Could be a painting that looks, frankly, a bit chaotic, or maybe a sculpture that just makes you tilt your head and think, what is that? How could it be so personal yet feel so, I don't know, meaningless sometimes?
It's a strange contrast, right?
Well, welcome to the Deep Dive. And specifically, welcome to episode 5 of our season exploring Francis Schaeffer's really influential book, Escape from Reason.
Yeah, great to be digging into this. And if you were with us last time, you'll remember we spent quite a bit of time on Schaeffer's idea of the two-story house.
Right, that analogy for the split in modern thinking.
Exactly. Downstairs, you've got the reasonable facts, things we can test, measure, logic. But then there's that upper story, which is reserved for non-reasonable faith. Things felt, believed, but totally separate from rational proof.
Okay.
So today, what we really want to unpack is how art specifically became such a huge expression of that upper story, how it somehow came to represent this attempt to escape nature, escape the perceived machine of the universe.
Okay, let's break that tension down a bit more. Schaeffer paints this picture of modern people feeling trapped in what he calls a deterministic machine.
Like being on a conveyor belt you can't get off.
Exactly. Everything feels predetermined by cause and effect, by natural law. No real freedom. But at the same time, there's this almost desperate yearning for absolute freedom, especially in a world where maybe God or universal truths seem off the table.
That's the conflict.
And that feeling trapped but desperate for freedom. Schaeffer says that's absolutely central to understanding modern art. It feels, honestly, pretty relevant even now. And art just gives us these incredibly vivid examples of that struggle. Like you said, Schaeffer knows how a lot of contemporary art, when it's just about raw self-expression, can come across as ugly or meaningless to people.
Yeah.
He argues it's not just, bad art. It's this unconscious scream for freedom, for autonomy. In a world where reason seems to have boxed us in, the art itself becomes a kind of symptom.
It's a really interesting point, and he contrasts that so sharply with things like industrial design or even science.
How so?
Well, think about designing a chair or a car or a bridge. It often has a real beauty, or at least it works, right? It's effective. And that's because it has to follow the curve of what is there, as Schaeffer puts it. It's tied to reality. Physics, materials.
Right, it has constraints.
Exactly. Same with science. It's limited by what you actually find in the universe. If it ignores that, it's not science anymore, it's science fiction. So industrial design, science, they're grounded. But art, with a capital A, in this modern sense, often expresses rebellion against those limits, sometimes through what seems like ugliness or chaos. It's trying to break free.
Okay, so if art is where this attempt happens, this leap beyond the rational lower story, maybe we should look at some specific examples. How does this play out in different art forms?
Definitely. Let's start with poetry and a figure like Martin Heidegger, a really major 20th century philosopher. Later in his life, after he turned 70, he seemed unable to fully square things with his earlier ideas. And in his book, What is Philosophy?, he ends with this fascinating line. But listen to the poet.
Listen to the poet. What do you mean by that? Like, listen to the message?
That's the interesting part. No, he explicitly says the content of the poetry doesn't matter. That's rational, lower story stuff. Different poets might even say contradictory things. For Heidegger, what mattered was the mere existence of poetry itself. Just the fact that it is. That existence is placed firmly in the upper story.
Okay, wait. The existence of poetry gives hope.
His thinking was something like this. If being, capital B, includes humans and humans verbalize, then the very fact that there are words in the universe expressed through poetry offers some kind of hope for meaning in being itself. The poet just is, and by existing, they become a kind of prophet. Because poetry exists, maybe life isn't just cold, hard facts. Maybe there's something more. It's a clear example of that irrational upper story. It has no real content, no specifics, but it offers this desperate sort of meaning, like searching for spirituality but finding an empty room, maybe.
Wow. Okay, that's quite a concept, just the existence, not the message.
Yeah.
That really flips how we usually think about poetry. And then there's André Malraux. Now, he was a fascinating character writer, adventurer, later France's Minister of Culture. In his book, The Voices of Silence, especially the last part, Aftermath of the Absolute, he really gets into this modern feeling, this death of hope of an absolute.
Malraux lived that tension. Schaeffer points out this deep tornness in him. On one hand, there's a kind of anti-humanism, maybe, a sense that without God or some anchor, humanity doesn't have intrinsic value. But on the other hand, Malraux has this powerful, ultimately irrational aspiration towards charity, or making a choice for humanity that his own reason couldn't really justify.
So he's stuck between reason saying it's meaningless and this feeling, this irrational hope.
Exactly. And for Malraux, art becomes the place for that hope, that upper story thing again. It has no rational basis, but you look to art as art to provide what reason denies. Art becomes the integration point, the leap for hope. Even when your mind is telling you it's hopeless, you know you're doomed by logic, but you look to art anyway. Someone reviewing him said Malraux was rising above such despair by eloquently summoning himself and others to see the identity of man in the timelessness of art. It's this powerful but ultimately ungrounded hope. Similar to Sir Herbert Reed, another critic who felt reason had to bow to art's mystique.
So art becomes the irrational refuge.
You could say that. And Picasso gives us another angle on this, a really compelling one. Early on, Picasso tried to find some kind of universal through abstraction. Remember those paintings? They got so abstract you couldn't tell a man from a woman or even a person from a chair.
Yeah, very abstract.
He'd essentially created his own little universe on the canvas, playing God in a way, but then he hit that wall. Communication breaks down. If you stand in front of it and have no idea what it's about, well, what's the point of being God on a small canvas if nobody gets it?
Right, the classic modern art problem for some viewers.
But then something changed. Picasso fell in love, and he started writing, "J'aime Eva, I love Eva," right across the canvas. Suddenly, bam, communication. But it wasn't rational communication based on the abstract forms. People understood it because he loved Eva. It was purely personal, emotional.
So the communication came from outside the painting's logic.
Precisely. It's that leap again. As a human being, especially faced with something like love, he had to leap beyond his abstract system. And you see this later, too. When he fell for Olga, his wife, he painted her portrait in this stunningly human, almost classical way. It stands out. Same with his paintings of Jacqueline later on. These works feel different from his purely abstract vases because they contain these very human, irrational leaps. It's a bit like Salvador Dali using, say, Christian symbols connotatively, using the feeling they evoke, not their actual meaning, to create a kind of illusion of communication, a jump into mysticism.
Okay, so painting gives us visual examples. What about music? Does Schaeffer see the same leap there?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Leonard Bernstein is a key example here. In his big choral work, Kaddish, Bernstein himself apparently indicated that music was his hope upstairs.
His hope upstairs.
Yeah, he wasn't looking for rational answers in the structure of the music itself necessarily. He was using music as the vehicle for that transcendent leap, that search for hope beyond reason. So it really does keep coming back to this two-level situation Schaeffer identified. The downstairs, reason, logic, it's seen as, well, dead. Exhausted, doesn't offer hope. And the only alternative seems to be this irrational leap upstairs into art, into poetry, into music. But the crucial thing is that leap can't be questioned or analyzed by reason. There's no bridge, no point of contact between the two levels.
It sounds quite desperate, actually. A leap into the void, almost.
It can be. And that sense of desperation leads Schaeffer to discuss some pretty provocative examples, like modern pornographic writing.
Okay. How does that fit into this philosophical framework?
Well, Schaeffer argues we're not just talking about crude stories, the kind that have always existed. He suggests that a lot of contemporary pornographic work needs to be read as serious philosophic statements.
Philosophic statement.
Yeah. Take someone like Henry Miller. Schaeffer points out that Miller often starts by rationally concluding that everything, even sex, is dead, meaningless. But then Miller makes a leap, often into a kind of pantheism, trying to find some meaning or divinity in everything, in nature itself, as a last resort.
So the pattern repeats. Reason hits a dead end, then an irrational leap for meaning.
Exactly. And then you have writers like Terry Southern, who wrote Candy. Schaeffer argues that despite the, explicit and often destructive content, Southern is making serious points. He's wrestling with what's left when old frameworks disappear. Southern apparently discussed how modern people are driven purely by psychology, which, if you take it to its logical conclusion, means that for older philosophies, there is no such thing as crime.
Whoa, explain that. No such thing as crime.
The idea being, if everything is just psychology, upbringing, conditioning, then crime as a concept of moral wrong, of real culpability, dissolves. It just becomes, behavior. There's no objective moral standard to break.
Okay, that's a heavy thought.
It is. And Schaeffer suggests these writers are, in a way, the philosophers acting this out. They place pornography in this context in the upper story. It becomes the ultimate release, the ultimate leap to freedom. The thinking is this smashes the deadness of the rational downstairs. Maybe it even ushers in a new golden age of pure autonomous freedom. It's Rousseau's idea of autonomous freedom taken to an extreme logical endpoint.
So it creates this stark contrast.
A total dichotomy. On one side, rationality man is dead. On the other, the autonomous pornographic as the only hope of freedom and of man. It's portrayed as this desperate spiritual search, looking for meaning or connection, but with no God there. It's mysticism, but directed towards nothing external. Schaeffer gives this really stark example from one work of a woman who seeks beatings just to feel something, to have proof of possession, because in a godless world she feels utterly alienated. It's total desperation, mysticism with nobody there.
That is incredibly bleak. And that profound desperation, Schaeffer sees that reflected elsewhere too, like in theater.
Yes, definitely. The theater of the absurd becomes a major expression of this. It pushes beyond even Sartre's existentialism, which still used, normal sentences to talk about meaninglessness. The theater of the absurd deliberately messes with language itself. Abnormal syntax and a devaluation of words, as Schaeffer puts it. It's trying to shout the more loudly that all is absurd by breaking the very tools of rational communication.
How does it do that? Is there a pattern?
Well, Martin Esslin, who wrote a lot about this, described it as having sort of 3 steps. First step, wake up, shock the audience, shake them out of their comfortable assumptions, metaphorically kick their bed, throw water on them.
Get their attention.
Right. Second step, once they're awake, look them right in the eye and say, there is nothing here. Total emptiness, bleakness. But then comes the third step, and this is crucial, an upper story mysticism, an attempt to communicate above normal communication, like those art happenings or environments.
Communicating above communication, what does that even mean?
It means it can't convey actual content because it's disconnected from reason. So Schaeffer argues it becomes a vehicle of manipulation. It evokes a feeling, maybe, but doesn't convey truth or meaning in a verifiable way. So you have these 2 incredibly pessimistic steps, followed by this completely unrooted mystical leap. It's almost tragic, this cycle of despair and irrational hope.
It really paints a picture of a culture grappling with a huge internal conflict.
That's the core of it. What Schaeffer is showing us is this almost monolithic concept, this widespread cultural pattern, the dichotomy, the 2 stories, and then the desperate leap upstairs. And once you accept that leap is necessary, the content of the leap, whether it's poetry, art, music, even the extreme stuff, it almost doesn't matter because it's fundamentally cut off from reason anyway. It's arbitrary in a sense. The act of leaping becomes the point, not what you leap towards.
Right. Understanding that helps make sense of why some modern expressions feel so jarring, maybe, or disconnected. It helps us see the underlying search, that deep human drive for meaning and hope, even when it manifests in ways that are hard to grasp at first. You really feel that sense of being trapped in the machine and wanting out.
Absolutely. And it leaves us with a pretty significant question to chew on, doesn't it? If this leap, this irrational jump, is so deeply embedded in how modern thought tries to escape the perceived dead end of reason, what would it actually look like to find hope and meaning without needing that kind of desperate leap? Are there other ways? Could that chasm Schaeffer describes actually be bridged?
That's definitely something to think about. A powerful place to pause. Well, we hope this deep dive into Chapter 5 of Schaeffer's Escape from Reason has sparked some thoughts for you. And if you do want to explore these ideas further, maybe engage in a deeper dialogue, we definitely encourage you to check out Joseph R. Miller's work over at his website, morethancake.org.